Hello, it's James from XRobots.co.uk. This is part 7 of Project Ultron, which is going to be a full-size robotic Ultron torso. So have a look at part 1 for the full description, and parts 2 through about 4 to 5 for some information on the R&D and some mini arms and a motion capture suit that I built, which is eventually going to partly control this as well as its own AI. So last time I built some abdominal linear actuators, and prior to that I built this semi-flexible sort of spine thing. But let's have a closer look at what we're going to do today. I'm trying to build the movie Ultron here, and one of the issues with that is it doesn't actually have a single spine at the back. It's got these two kind of columns, and the aim was that I've printed some of these parts in Ninja Flex, so they're flexible, which is a flexible rubber-like filament, and the aim was that would allow the spine to bend all the way around. And I've got these cords that go through, which are actually just raw Ninja Flex filaments, and the aim was to tighten those down to tension it, and I could actually use something stiffer like nylon filament or some nylon cord, or I could put something more flexible in, just like some bungee cord. This stuff's pretty springy. It's actually quite a lot like a round drive belt, so that'll probably do. The problem I've got is that it can sort of twist this way, and of course it'll be to move back and forward. But the problem is I can't really compress these very easily, so I could have printed these in a lower infill density, but then of course a lot of the weight of the torso is on the top, so I don't want it to sort of go all squashy and the whole thing to just fall over. So the issue of course is that moving side to side is going to be a bit of a problem because these don't actually compress. So as the abs get longer and shorter, what we want is the ability of course to be able to bend forwards as they get shorter, bend up as they get longer, and also tilt side to side, and at the moment I can't do that. So the plan is to implement another axis which rotates here, which will allow that rotation sideways, but this sort of spine is still strong enough to support the whole weight of the torso, as well as the ab linear actuators I made last time. The plan is to implement a rather simple axis with two bearings in a block, which is going to be solvent welded on top of the top piece of the spine, which is this piece touching the ground here. There's a recess in each side there for a bearing with an 8mm inside diameter, so we can run a piece of studding through and attach that to a plate which then fits the top of the linear actuators. So there'll be a block which is bolted to the studding like so, and you'll have noticed that when those linear actuators are in their mid position, in fact they sit slightly higher than the spine, so the actual rotational axis is going to be lower than the tops of those to match the top of the spine, and this block will then bring up the height. There will then be a plate on the top which goes forward and has flexible linkages to the top of those ab actuators. Here are those parts. So we've got one here with the two bearings I've already shoved in there, which fit pretty well, and that allows this studding to go through. So this is the back of the curve of the spine, and then this piece will bolt onto that studding, and that will allow it to hinge around, and the screw holes are there to attach to the top plate. So I'm going to cut this studding a bit shorter, put some lock nuts on, put this together, and we'll offer it up to the spine and see what's next. Alright, here it is assembled, so it's going to go on here, and this piece goes like this, and that allows that sideways motion. So now we need to put a plate on top that goes on top of these with two flexible couplings. So here we are. So the two red parts that we can see here, the existing linear sliders which we've got on those ab linear actuators, And we've got this blue plate at the back, and that is the existing part we just printed. So now we need this plate that links all of them together. So that's going to be in 2 layers, which are 5mm thick. One is pictured in blue and one in purple, and that is going to attach everything together there. So the green parts are going to be Ninja Flex, so they're fairly flexible, and I've done the same thing I did at the bottom of those actuators, leaving an 8mm hole through there to put some studding in to bolt all of that together. Those are going to be screwed onto the plate, and I've left holes that run all the way through, but I've got these sort of shims which are a bit like large washers that are going to align on top of that Ninja Flex part, or underneath I should say, so that I can actually screw plastic through those layers into plastic on the other side, because the screws will probably just pull through the Ninja Flex otherwise. So apart from that, it's fairly simple. I've made it this kind of Y shape so that I can get the arm towers in. So if you have a look back to my demo arm where I controlled it with a motion capture sensor, then we can see that's going to basically be one large rotational tower for each arm. And those are probably going to need to be taller than the rest of the torso. So I've left these cutouts with the large bolt holes each side to bolt on those arm modules, which are going to be made separate and detachable and serviceable, rather than basically deciding where the axes are now. So we'll get these all printed, we'll assemble it, and then we can try working on the actual scaling for the whole torso. Here are my main plates. There are 2 of them. The reason I've done it that way is to take out the slight warpage that we get with ABS. So if I put these together back to back, you can see there's a slight gap there. But obviously these will be solvent welded together with acetone, which is going to bring that gap away, and then they end up perfectly flat. And I've done this quite a lot of times. My R6 droid is a good example of that. So all of the straight parts are actually 2 parts which are slightly bent, stuck back to back. And we've got the bushings here, which have come out incredibly well. These are printed on the Lolspot Flex Extruder on the Mini. I did have some trouble with some prints with the verticals not bonding together, and I've upped the temperature slightly to about 235 degrees, and this has come out really, really well. It's 70% infill, and it is flexible, printed in Ninja Flex, and it's incredibly tough. It took about 4.5 hours, so the other one is still printing, but I'll have no problem bolting through those holes. You know, this stuff, I really can't separate the layer lines. So yeah, that's pretty good. And I've got these shims, as I said, which fit on top, either side. So I can screw through there, and the screw head won't pull through the rubber, and those will bolt on to each side. So we'll get this solvent welded together, which will just involve putting acetone on, and then we'll get it all assembled. We're going to solvent weld this together with acetone. I've put some screws in here, which I'll screw in eventually, and that will help me align the parts to make sure this is all aligned together. And I've got my big box of clamps, so I'll go around and clamp this up afterwards. So I'm just going to be using some acetone I've got here, which has got a bit of white ABS dissolved in it, but you could use it neat, and I'm just going to brush that on all over. Stick the 2 together. And these parts are all printed in ABS, which dissolves in acetone, so that should make quite a good solvent weld. And obviously I'm putting the flat surfaces that were on the print bed together, so there should be not too many gaps and lumps and bumps, so they should align together pretty well. Acetone evaporates pretty quick, so you have to do this quite quickly. Try and get it together when it's wet. Bit more challenging on the big pieces. Right, and get that screwed down. Alright, I've now got both of these bushings printed, and I've got these things, as I said, which are going to sit on top there and allow me to screw through plastic to plastic. So I've got some short screws to screw in there, 6 on each one, and I've also cut some studding up which I've cut a slot in the end of so that I can screw that through that way, through the hole and through the plastic to mount these. So I'm going to get these pieces screwed on and then we'll mount it on the top. Alright, everything's screwed up and this is a pretty sturdy platform now, so there's obviously some flex here as there is at the bottom, so if I really push this it can lean. There doesn't need to be too much flex there because there's not actually going to be too much in terms of torso tipping sideways, because of the whole angle means that right at the top, of course, the head will be moving right over if it goes too far, which is a bit unnatural. And of course most of the flex for front and back is coming from the spine. So actually this feels like a really good sturdy platform with the spine not flexing sideways, relying on this pivot point I put in, and these obviously supporting it quite well. So this feels like a really good sturdy platform to build the rest of the torso on, that's not just going to collapse under the flex of the Ninja Flex. So I'm just going to power up these motors and see how well the side to side works, and then that's pretty much it. We can get on with the rest. I've attached some wires temporarily to the motor and I've got an 11.1 volt LiPo here. I wasn't sure whether I was going to run these off 12 or 24 volts, but for now it's 11.1. So I'm just going to bring one up and one down and we'll see what happens. So just for now, obviously there's no control system. So let's run that right to the top. So hopefully we can see if this was locked down, and that spine has shifted a bit actually, but mainly the pivot point has moved. So now let's put this right down. See what happens. So that seems quite capable of flexing in that direction. I'm going to bring them both up now and we'll see what happens when it looks right up. So obviously this again will be sprung down, and so that seems to work quite well, and that spine has actually flexed fairly uniformly. Let me put it this way round and we'll bring those back down again. And again that spine seems to have come down again, so pretty happy with that as a platform. Looks like it can lean all the way round, side to side and up and down. Probably it can move further than it needs to, so that's a pretty good basis to build on. Before I can carry on with any sort of things like arm mechanics and the upper torso, the mechanical stuff, I need to work out how the cosmetics look for the lower torso so I can scale everything correctly. So I've started by looking on Google Images at various reference images of Ultron and trying to draw the parts out that are silver. So if you remember, inside Ultron it looks red, which is why all my mechanics are red, and the outside's going to be printed in silver ABS. Now all these parts are going to be detachable as well, so that at some point I can take them off, and if I want to have it chromed up or something I can do some extra work on the finishing. For now they're going to be raw 3D prints, so there's going to be some screws in the back here that actually hold that in place so it can be removed, and that's going to be the same for all of the panels. So this is the piece that sits just above the cod plate and goes up the middle of the abs, and there's a pivot point there for a thing which is going to pivot, and that's going to rest in the recess on that Y plate that I just made when the extra piece is on the top. So this is the first real part that we can stick on and try and place. Now that's all going to be made in several pieces which are printed flat on the bed, then it's going to be stuck together, and I've got these locating holes that run through them so I can get everything located properly. The piece in the middle, as I say, will screw onto a bracket, and the bracket will be solvent welded to the existing chassis, and this will be free to be removed. So I've got some big chunks to print here, And after these are done, we'll continue to work around the torso, adding in the key parts. Here it is. So what I've done is just put some 3mm axles through there. They're pretty tight. Eventually I'll solvent weld them, so I've just got these bits of metal and the holes there, so the whole thing goes together. So I need to print a little bracket that screws on the back, and I can mount that on the front. The next part of this is the two sort of pistons that actually cover the real pistons, which are at each side here, so these taller blue parts. And these are going to be split up into two parts and printed on their ends, so I get the good quality of the build lines going the right way, and I don't get lots of steps in them, which I'd get if I printed them lying down. I've put some mounting plates at the top here, which will eventually dock into some pieces which are going to be attached to the stationary part of the piston. Here we go, so I've got those printed. They were printed in two halves and I've just solvent welded them together, and as I mentioned, all of these parts will be removable if I want to come back and finish these anymore, but for now they're going to stay as they are, and these will screw onto brackets I haven't made yet. So here it is in real life, and I've also got a block printed on the back of here which is screwed on, and that will solvent weld onto the chassis of the base that I've already made. But before I attach these, I want to make some more pieces so I can get this placement correct front to back. So here's the next part of this. I spent quite a long time trying to match this part to reference pictures and build out the cod plate and the things that are at the sides here essentially, and these eventually butt up to some extra side conduits and where the hips attach to the side. So Ultron's got a very flat front really, and hopefully I've got these shapes approximately right. I know my spacing between the uprights is slightly different because I have to match that to my actual build. So what we've got is essentially some large blocks here which are going to be split up for printing. The cod plate again is split into two, and we've got these two red blocks which are actually going to be Ninja Flex, again in flexible filament to hold the bottom of those sort of fake piston fronts so they can move all around when they need to. So if we just go and unhide what we've got at the back here, I've already split these up for printing so they're flat on the bed, so the side parts are divided in two, and also these red Ninja Flex blocks. Alright, so here are all the parts. These are the bits that go together. I need to pair these up so they go in the right order. Not sure which ones match, but anyway, they've come out pretty nicely. I've printed them again in a good orientation to get build lines going this way so I don't get steps on the contours. So pretty happy with how those have come out. Those are a 0.3mm layer height and everything is ABS. Now these are the Ninja Flex parts, which are exceptional quality. It's the first time I've used Ninja Flex in silver. And it's actually quite shiny and nice, and of course they are flexible. They were 23% infill, and that should be fine to sit the bottom of those things in at the sides. So I'm going to get some of this stuff put together. Some of these bits will solvent weld onto the last parts, and in fact the cod plate, which is in two pieces, fits exactly in the bottom. So let's get that stuck together and see where we are on Ultron. So here it is in one piece so far. These parts, as I say, slot into these Ninja Flex blocks, which means they can be lent all around, and they need some brackets holding them to the stationary part of the actuator at the top there, just to hold those in place. And they've got those ears on with holes, so that's no problem to add the bracket. And there is another feature that goes up the sides as well. So feeling pretty happy with that. That's the kind of level of detail that we're going to expect for the whole project. So let's have a bit of a look round this as well. If we just turn this around, so obviously we've still got these sides here. As I say, there is a piece of conduit that sits here and runs up to the big scoop that goes under the arm. And then we've got obviously the sides of this, which are where the hips are. So looking at the size of this, it seems quite wide, but this is actually as wide as my physical hips. So with the extra hips on, it's a bit like I'm wearing a costume, so it's about the right sizing, which I was going for, which is 20 to 30% bigger than a human. Obviously around the back, these red parts as well are going to have some rigid sections on each part attached with brackets so they can move, and obviously then we'll work our way up to the torso. So I'm going to do one more part, which is pretty much the sternum, or the breastbone, which sits on top of here, and then next time I'll be scaling the rest out. And here it is. So I spent quite a long time trying to get this shape right, and I think that that's just about it really. It's quite hard to mark details on a contour once you've drawn it, so some of them are actually missing, but anyway, I'm fairly happy with that. And once it's printed, I think that's going to fit right in. The only exception to this being a one-piece print are the red sort of bolts either side, which I'm going to make separately and stick on. But apart from that, it should print hopefully in one piece, and it should deal with the overhang okay, just in there. So let's get that printed, and that will be the final piece for this episode. Here it is, so that's going to fit in just there. I did originally put a pivot point in, which you can maybe just see there if I get my finger through, and that is eventually going to pivot on this. So it's not actually on the bolts, which are essentially fake, it's a bit higher up, so this can move backwards and forwards. This also fits in the channel I left in the top plate here quite nicely, so that the rest of the torso can come over, and this can sit slightly back, or it can move backwards and forwards as the torso flexes. There's also plenty of play left to right as this plate moves, as I demonstrated at the beginning. I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out so far. Next time I'm going to be scaling out the hips and also the torso so I can get that scale right and get the shoulder motion and the spacing right between those rotational shoulder towers. So have a look back in the early parts to have a look at the R&D on that shoulder mechanism and how that's going to work with the motion capture sensors, and that basically explains the reason why I'm building it in that fashion. But that's all for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to check out updates on other projects, and also check out the social media links in the description to this video, including my new Instagram accounts.